Okay, now it's my pleasure to introduce to you Chuck Harwood. Chuck Harwood is the Regional Director for the Federal Trade Commission in Seattle. Chuck and I go back many, many years. He has been leader of the FTC for many years. In fact, for about 5 years, he was the head of the entire consumer protection unit for the nation in Washington, D.C., and then came back to our little Northwest region more recently. But he is a true expert on all things consumer protection and imposters. Please welcome Chuck Harwood.
Well, the truth is the hill in Washington, D.C. does not compare to the hills we have around here. So I was glad to be back. So thanks, Doug, and thanks to AARP for hosting this important conversation today. I guess I'm your appetizer before lunch, and which I know is coming up next. But in the meantime, I have a lot of information to feed to you. We're going to start with, the whole thing is about unmasking imposters, and that's what I'm going to talk about. But I'm going to talk about it from a variety of perspectives and sort of talk about some of the things that you can do and hopefully give you some takeaways and maybe some suggestions for sharing the information you're going to learn with your friends and neighbors and family. So let's begin by returning to the topic of imposters. Let me see if I can make this work here. There we go. All right, so let's take a look at this.
Granddad, it's me. An accident in Mexico. I'm in jail.
Jimmy, is that you?
Yeah, it's Jimmy. I need money for bail right now.
In jail?
You need to send money right now. Please don't tell anyone.
Scammers are tricky and can pretend to be anybody in any situation. They seem like the real deal. They play on your fears. The goal? To get you to act fast. Check out if they really are who they say they are, even if they sound like a loved one. Heard from an imposter? Report it at ftc.gov/imposters.
Okay, so I'm not going to ask how many people have gotten that call. I suspect a lot of hands would go up if I did. But presumably most of you know what that is. That's the grandkid or grandparent scam, depending on where you're sitting. Or it can be, there are a variety of versions of that. There's a family emergency scam that can be from a relative. There's a friend scam that can be from a friend. A lot of those scams, that one we just saw, that imposter scam we just saw, may be based in part on information they already have. A lot of particularly younger people these days post a lot of information about themselves on Facebook, where they're traveling, what they're doing. That information can be used to facilitate the scam. But even if there's not much information, the scammers can still run it. All they do is they trick you into saying things that they can then use later on, and you don't realize that you gave away the information. They'll call and say, "Granddad, it's your grandson." You say, "Oh, Chuck, is that you?" And then now they know the grandson's name, right? Or something like that. So they're pretty tricky, and while it helps to have information, they don't always need that. Last year, actually no, this is 2015, the FTC received about 10,000 complaints about that one scam alone. And I will honestly admit that we only get the tip of the iceberg when it comes to complaints. So you can easily multiply that by at least several times to get a sense of the number of people who've actually received those calls from scammers. Here in Washington State, I'm looking at a number. I know that we had many of them last year in Washington State as well. So they're calling constantly, hoping to get someone to bite. Let's go on to the next one here. Now there are all kinds of imposters. We've heard about 3 at least so far today. I just showed you the family and friends imposter scheme. You heard about the IRS scheme. Doug did an amazing job of profiling those operations in India, and also there's been some great, as Doug indicated, some great efforts on the part of law enforcement in the U.S. and India to try to stop some of those schemes. Courtney Gregoire from Microsoft talked about tech support scams, again, imposters. There are a variety of others out there as well. There are romance scams where people pose as people looking for a new love life online. There are other kinds of government grant scams, imposters. People call and claim to be from the FTC, for example, or they call to claim to be from the Social Security Administration. Doug talked about that, or from the local jury pool. Different kinds of government grants. There's the C-suite version. That's corporate lingo for corporate suite, where somebody claims to be the CEO of the corporation. Oftentimes they'll send an email to somebody else in the corporation saying, "I need that employee data immediately so I can finish my report. Just send it to this email address or this place." And what they've done, of course, is they have somehow hacked into or obtained information that would allow them to impersonate the actual corporate executive. Remember what Courtney talked about, that while they used to be, these kind of bogus emails used to be easy to spot, increasingly they're doing a better and better job of making it look like it's from a legitimate person you know. Other scams, how do pets engage in imposters, you're wondering? Well, it's not the pets that do it, but what happens is we consistently hear of people who thought they were going to get a valuable or desirable pet. They saw an ad in the paper, they saw an ad someplace else, they reached out to try to acquire this pet. Sometimes the story will come along with some kind of sad pet adoption story about pets that are facing dire consequences if they aren't adopted immediately. It's in these instances, it's scammers posing as people with pets. Medical and insurance scams, I'll talk about those in a minute. Well-known companies, all kinds, obviously Microsoft. I just spent 6 months trying to deal with an imposter scheme that was using Expedia's name in connection with a variety of travel schemes that they were trying to promote. So all kinds of companies are subject to these imposters as well. So the problem is there's many, many of these folks out there posing as something that they're not. And of course, they do that because they're for two reasons. First of all, they want to defraud consumers of money. They want to use that, they want to somehow, through some storyline, get consumers, send them money, whether it's send them money to get somebody out of jail, or to pay money to fix a computer, or to pay money to get the IRS off your back. They want to get you to pay money. So it's a fraud. Secondly, they're trying to, in many instances, they're trying to steal information. They steal information for a variety of reasons. Obviously, that oftentimes can be used to get additional money indirectly. There are other reasons people steal money as well. So the second reason they're doing it is to steal information. So the second thing they're doing is they're trying to steal information and engage in identity theft. I'm going to talk a little bit about both of those problems today as part of how we can respond to this scourge of imposters and how we can unmask them. So first of all, let's take a look at another kind of fraud, and there's an imposter element to this one too. So if I can get to run here. There we go. So you all have seen these. This is a letter that says, congratulations. Actually, this is actually a sample letter, but it is a real sample in that it was used in actual scams. You have won $1.675 million in a lottery that, guess what, you probably don't remember entering because you never did, but you still got the letter, and who knows, maybe there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So more people than we'd like to think respond to these. I have pictures back in my office of piles of mail that some consumers had accumulated from these schemes, and it's devastating what happens. It's not uncommon to talk to consumers who've lost tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in these schemes. And if it's not 1.6 million, this poor consumer is only being offered $813,000 in connection with the one they're being offered. The third one, I don't think I have a number in there, but I would bet you that it's at least $500,000. So total up there, we've probably got a couple $1 million, maybe $3 million of supposed winnings that are just being offered in these three examples. And of course, as Doug has said, if you're here, you already are pretty cautious and already know about schemes, but these are all scams. And what's actually behind each of these letters or sweepstakes scams? So here's a map of the scheme that mailed out all those letters. This is courtesy of my friends at the U.S. Department of Justice. It's part of a joint initiative that the U.S. Department of Justice, the FTC, and others undertook last September. And what you see here is this shows you all of the different entities involved in that one single mailing scam that I just showed you. And I'll just quickly walk you through it. First of all, there was the entity in Switzerland that was actually arranging for the mail to go out to the consumers. Secondly, there was the list broker. They had collected information about consumers' names, addresses, that they were then selling the consumers' information to the mailer in Switzerland. Third, there was the printer who actually printed all those mail, and they actually even printed the envelopes and the stamps that went on the envelopes. And they were printing in India. Now, why India? It's cheap to print there. They would print them all up, they'd put them in a box, send them off to the U.S., where they would be dropped in the mail. Fourth part of that scheme, of course, is the victim, sadly. And that mail is being sent from someplace in the world. It could be sent directly from India, or we saw a lot of it being sent from other parts of the world to victims in the United States who ended up sadly spending millions of dollars in response to that scheme. Finally, the victims the way the victims were responding was they were putting checks in the mail to return in response to those letters. Those checks were actually going back to the Netherlands. That's an operation called a caging service, if you're into this world. And caging services are basically the entities that get the letters, they open them up, they separate the payments from the information in the letters, because remember, that information is valuable too. They want just the money. They also want to know who entered this contest, because, hey, that person is probably going to sign up for more contests. That person is going to be vulnerable to other schemes. So they're taking the money out, they're taking the information out, they're uploading the information to the cloud, where it can be downloaded again and reused. And then they're sending the checks off to a payment processor, somebody who actually takes the checks and turns them into money. And in the case of this scheme, the payment processors were actually in Vancouver, Canada. They were actually taking the checks and turning them into money. And then whoever started the scheme could then download the money as well from anywhere in the world. So that's all the steps behind that one single supposed prize scheme. And every day, in every way, they're all over the world. They're running the same kind of scheme. This is just one example, but in the ones we saw, we also saw folks in Vegas. We also saw folks in other parts of the world. Now I'm told there's a number of these operations coming from Eastern Europe. So really, there's no end to the way that these international operations can reach out. So another imposter type of scheme that has some people posing as something they're not. So charities. There are many charities, valuable charities. Charities are a huge part of our economy. I'm always amazed when I hear about how much money consumers in the United States give every year to charities. Charities, they fill in the gaps. They help consumers in important ways, except when the charity is a scam. And of course, then what happens is, for one reason or another, the money that consumers intend to go to a valuable cause instead goes in the pockets of the scammers. So here's a charity that the FTC sued a couple of years ago. The FTC Seattle office sued. And let me see if I can get this to run here. There we go, right there. Okay, so this is an audio you're going to hear, I hope.
Hello, how you doing today, Jack?
Not bad.
Good to hear, sir. My name is Kristen White. I'm with the Verification Department. We appreciate your support today. And how much have you agreed to donate?
25.
God bless your heart. On behalf of the Church of Cancer Fund of America, we want to thank you for your generous time and gift with us today. Your donation will provide pain medication, medical supplies, and hospice support. And we thank you once again for your support. And how are you taking care of your donation? Would I be by debit or credit?
Check. Excuse me, I'll be writing a check.
That's through we processed check by phone this year. We'll provide you with your confirmation number, and you will receive your receipt in the mail for tax purposes.
Okay, so what they're saying in that, I realize it's a little inaudible. I apologize for that. The quality of it's not good. But the key parts, she's still talking? Stop.
What kind of credit would that be?
Stop talking. You can stop now. Anyway, the key part is that she's saying that the money's going to be used for medical supplies, hospice support, pain medication for children's cancer patients, right? Children who are experiencing cancer. So that's what she said in the call. And that's what the consumer who donated the money thought he was going to get. Okay, you can now stop and go away. Here we go. But, so here's a complicated chart that shows you how they actually spent the money. And there's actually only two bars here you need to pay attention to. That's the purple bar, the long bar, and that's actually how much money they spent on raising money from consumers. See how much that is? So we've got millions of dollars being raised being used to raise money from consumers. They were paying for the fundraising, they were paying for the corporate executives, they're paying for everything. And then the other key bar you need to pay attention to is a little tiny red one at the other end. That's how much they actually spent on the charities programs that they intend to help. So that's actually the amount of money they spent to help children who were experiencing cancer. So you can see that money was largely going in the pockets of, there's actually a family, mostly in Oklahoma. They ran 4 different charities, mostly all related to cancer, and they grossed $187 million that was supposedly going to charity, and a paltry amount went to charity, and almost all of it went into their pockets. The good news is we shut that operation down. We got some money back, which is now actually being distributed to some charities. The help is the FTC's case, but I also want to note that we received help from all 50 states, including the state of Washington, which was instrumental in helping us develop the case and put it together. In fact, filed the case with us. So that's a great case. Sadly, there are many other charities out there that are excellent charities, but there are a few bad ones like this one, bad apples, and the trick is how do you separate them? We'll come back to that in just a minute and talk about some of the strategies for dealing with charities, imposters, and other things. So one final imposter I want to talk about briefly. Let's take a look at this, because this imposter you're going to hear about is also involved in both stealing money and identity. Let's just see if we can get to run here.
A teacher was what I always wanted to be. I got my doctoral degree in early childhood education. My husband and I had a wonderful marriage, and I lost him in September of last year. I got a call from someone who indicated he was from Medicare. They told me that they needed my Social Security number. They needed my bank account number for new Medicare cards. I told them I was not giving them the information and hung up the phone.
There were thousands of consumers affected by this scam. They told consumers that if they didn't provide this information that they might lose their Medicare benefits, and they implied that that would happen pretty quickly.
They called back and I continued to refuse to give them the information, but they would transfer me to someone else who would give me the same pitch they were giving me. I just wanted them off the phone. I gave them the information they wanted.
These telemarketers are professionals. They know what buttons to push. They know what to say to get people to provide their information. If you receive a call from a government agency, be very skeptical. Government agencies don't call consumers to ask them for money. They don't call consumers to ask for personal information.
I think it is very important that all of us continue to learn about scams.
Because of consumer complaints like the one we received from Dr. Bowers, we were able to go into federal court, get a freeze on the defendant's assets, and shut the company down.
I was so glad to even hear that they did win the case and shut the people down.
So I love that video for a couple reasons. First of all, you notice there's some odd gaps in there. I think we might have bleeped out some four-letter words from Dr. Bowers in those, because you'll see if you listen closely, there's these gaps, like what happened there? Well, I think she had a few additional phrases she used to describe some of the scammers that may have been left out. Secondly, Tracy Thomas is an FC attorney. You saw her. That is the cleanest I've ever seen her desk. I've known Tracy for many years, and obviously somebody said you're not going on camera till you clean your desk up, which is an interesting management strategy now that I think about it. Third thing is that demonstrates the power of a story, the power of somebody who's had the experience with a scam, talking about their experience, and educating others around about their experience. It takes real bravery to do what Dr. Bowers. Dr. Bowers is obviously an intelligent, trained individual. To be able to go on and to go in front of the public and say, it happened to me, it can happen to you, here's what happened, is far more meaningful, frankly, than having me stand up here and do that. She's got the voice of experience, the voice of reason that makes sense to listen to. And so those are all, it's fabulous. Now the good news on that is that we did actually shut down that scheme. They were trying to steal money in connection with Medicare information. The bad news is that there's more opportunities for those scammers like that one ahead of us. In fact, as many of you may know, in April of next year, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid are rolling out new Medicare cards. There's some good news. They're going to get your Social Security numbers off your Medicare cards. The bad news is that scammers who are trying to think about other ways to call you and claim they're from Medicare and Medicaid, and that somehow you need to give them the information so they can send that card out to you, now have a new story they can tell you. So when you go back to your friends and family, if somebody says to you, I got a call from Medicare about my new Medicare card, say, stop. They didn't call you. Because Medicare and Medicaid is working on their plans now, but they have no plans to call anybody about these cards. They're going to come up with other ways to distribute them, along with other educational efforts. But you can imagine already the scammers are writing their scripts, getting ready to make those calls. They're opportunistic, and this is a great opportunity for them. So, identity theft. There are all kinds of identity theft. Identity theft of financial information. Identity theft that can be used to apply for taxes. Identity theft that can be used to apply for employment. Medical, we just saw that kind of in stealing that information. It can be used for a variety of things. And finally, identity theft can be used to apply for benefits that other consumers are entitled to. Happens in all different ways, and we need to be aware that it's happening. We need to be aware of where our information is. So let's talk about some of the strategies for dealing with identity theft. Because the truth is, while we can be aware, it's very difficult to be. In fact, it is impossible to be 100% safe from identity theft. So how does it happen? Happens in many different ways. Obviously, it's lost and stolen wallets, smartphones, mail, financial documents, theft by family members, friends, visitors, caregivers. Among the senior community where you have caregivers coming in, there's been a real problem with some caregivers stealing information. It happens through data breaches, hacking, skimming, malware, some of the things that we heard Courtney talk about, corrupt insiders, people posing as someone they're not. And then finally, it happens through scams and phishing schemes. The phishing schemes like we've seen where people try to trick you into giving information, posing as someone they're not, posing as somebody that you want to trust, that you want to give information to, and you don't, and you're fooled into giving it. So when information is stolen by identity thieves, it's used in a whole range of different ways. It's like getting a credit card almost, isn't it? You can have money, but wait, you can use information and do a lot of different things with it. It is flexible. It can be used in many different ways. And a thief who gets information can use it in many different ways. They can use it to file for tax returns. 29% of identity theft instances we saw in 2016 involved filings for tax returns. It can be used to file for credit cards, obtain new credit cards. 33% in 2016 of the information is used for credit cards. Apply for new phone utility service, apply for bank service, apply for employment. It's used in a whole range of different ways. It's very fungible information that can be used a range of different in many ways. So let's talk about some ideas for how we're going to deal with the things we've been talking about today: imposters, fraud, and identity theft. What are some of the strategies? Because if you haven't figured out by now, there's a game plan here. You've heard each of us sort of talk about this, but the game plan is this. So General Ferguson and my job is to try to enforce the laws. We're working at it. We try to do the best we can. We're making big headway in some cases. We're struggling in some other areas. People like entities like AARP do a great job of helping you understand some of the frauds out there, some of the scams out there. They're engaging in sort of taking those law enforcement actions and making them meaningful, making them so that you can understand it, and disseminating it to you. Entities like Microsoft are working hard to protect their customers because they understand that they need to protect their customers from these schemes and help them. But then there's a final part to this, and that is each of you in this room. Because the goal is for us is for you to take away the information you hear today and use it in your own lives, and secondly, maybe share the information with others. So let's spend a minute talking about what the takeaways are, using some clipboards here. First of all, imposters. What do we do about imposters? Well, the first thing to remember is the government didn't just call you. I assure you the government did not just call you. Whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, or IRS, or the jury pool, or the Federal Trade Commission, unless you called them first, they didn't call you. You're not getting cold calls from them. You have to start the call first. There are a few minor exceptions, but frankly, let's not dwell on the one or two examples versus a million where they didn't call you. So secondly, the government didn't call. Secondly, pay safely. A lot of these schemes work because people transfer money very quickly in manners that can't be reversed. They pay with Apple iTunes gift cards. I think Doug talked about that. Or they pay with wire transfers, Western Union or MoneyGram. Or they pay with some other scheme that's very hard to get the money back. Even by check, it can be hard to get the money back. So you want to think about the ways to pay safely. Use a credit card if you're going to pay for something, or better yet, think about it before you pay anything at all. The scams, all of them involve getting consumers to act fast, act now. They want to get you in that, I think Doug talked about the ether. They want to get you in that cloud where you're acting quickly before you can get out of that cloud and actually say, wait a minute, I can now see that this is a scam and I'm being duped. And then finally, what we heard from Courtney is that it's important to practice computer hygiene. And by the way, while you're at it, practice some phone hygiene too by being careful about what the phone calls you take and being careful about when you even pick up the phone. So practice or manage your use of the phone and the computer carefully. So those are the takeaways for dealing with imposters. How about a few takeaways for dealing with, I don't have a clipboard for prize promotions like that one I showed you. My suggestion for that is get a shredder. That's my only bullet on that clipboard. But now the next clipboard I have is, what about fraudulent charities? What do we do about those folks? The cancer funds like I talked about. First of all, sleep on it. When they call you, you don't need to respond right away. I mean, you can think about it overnight. Make sure that's the kind of charity you really want to give to. Avoid those emotional, tearjerker type stories. Instead, think about what makes sense for you, for your community, for the entities you want to support. Secondly, ask the charity directly, what will you do with my money? Don't let them say, some vague promises about the money. Ask them directly, what will you do with the money I give you? And how much of the money is actually going to go to the intended recipients, the programmers, we would say in the charitable world. to be used for consumers. Third, donate to charities you know and trust. Local charities are a great idea. National charities you've worked with for years are a great idea. But think about who you're donating to and donate to ones you know and trust. Don't trust somebody who just calls you out of the blue and says that they're with Children's Cancer. It sounds good, doesn't it? They're an imposter, though, because they're sounding like other charities, but they're not the real thing. They're simply an imposter. Donate to charities you know and trust. And finally, if you're not sure which charities you know and trust, do some research. And this is an assignment for you when you leave here. There are lots of ways to research charities. One of the best, frankly, is here in Washington State. Our Secretary of State's office has a great charities website. Secretary of State are the main charities regulators, along with the Attorney General's office, and they have a wonderful site. If you happen to have come up from Milton Fruitwater this morning, or from someplace down in Hermiston for us today, Oregon AGO also has a great website. Oregon Attorney General's office on charities. And finally, there's some great private sector entities that have charities information. Any one or all of these will give you information about the charities, how much actually goes to the programs. BBB, Better Business Bureau, has a great entity called Wise Giving, or it's just give.org. Charity Navigator helps people identify these. And then finally, CharityWatch.org and GuideStar. These are all wonderful, legitimate entities that will help you pick the right charities. I have some charities information over my desk if you're looking for it. But if you can't find those, just start with the Secretary of State's site, and you'll be able to go to the other sites from there as well. So do your research. Next clipboard, what do we do about identity theft? Well, identity theft is tricky, and I've got some late-breaking news on this, by the way. But first, there are essentially 3 steps that we tell anybody dealing with identity theft to do. First of all, contact the companies where the identity theft occurred. If you know that you've been the victim of identity theft, you saw odd information on your credit report, you received a strange email, strange mail that suggests somebody applied for something in your name. You get a call from a debt collector who claims they owe you a debt that you don't remember ever agreeing to. Contact the companies where the fraud occurred and tell them you're the victim. Secondly, contact CRAs up here, credit reporting agencies. You only need to contact one, although there are 3. When you contact one, that will tell all 3. They will allow you to place what's called a fraud alert on your credit report so that it's harder to actually get access to the information on your credit report in the future without finding out that you've been a victim of identity theft. In other words, it helps creditors make sure that you are who you say you are when they need to get additional credit. And if this all seems a little confusing, I have one suggestion, and that's go to identitytheft.gov. And that is this site right here. So identitytheft.gov is a federal government site. It was created a number of years ago at the direction of the president to try to simplify what is, let's face it, an extraordinarily challenging, difficult, and possibly confusing task. That is fixing your identity, fixing your information. And identitytheft.gov, it's identitytheft.gov, one word for identity theft, then gov. It basically, the goal is to create a plan. And let me show you what that looks like. So you go to the site, and you get asked a variety of pieces of information that allows you to create an identity theft report that you can use to submit to merchants, to the credit reporting agencies, to others, that will explain what happened, that will help them better understand what they need to do, and by the way, will help you put alerts on your credit reports and things like that that will allow people to see that you've been the victim of identity theft and allow them to know that they should look carefully before they grant further credit in your name. Also, it helps you create a larger plan. And this is actually a screen from it. Once you create once you go on identitytheft.gov, it says, okay, once you've told us what happened to you, and you tell them what happened on the site, it then suggests things you need to do. If it's tax identity theft, it'll say contact the IRS. It'll talk about how to place fraud alerts on your credit reports. It'll talk about how reviewing your credit report for information and how to place longer-term credit reports or something called credit freezes. Each of these steps is spelled out in detail on identitytheft.gov website, so it actually walks you through all this. So the takeaway here is if you don't remember any of the rest of what I've said about identity theft, check out this site and you'll find out what you need to do to follow up on identity theft. So some breaking news, as I said, on identity theft, and here is the breaking news. So the FTC just completed a study where we actually posted on what's called a paste site, internet paste site, the supposed file information for 100 consumers. That was really information we made up, but it looked pretty authentic. And we posted it to see how long it would take scammers to get the information and begin to use it in identity theft situations. The page sites are sites that stuff is displayed in free text or plain text. It's often used by scammers to exchange information. So we did it twice over in a 2-week period. Our first posting, it took them 1.5 hours before we saw the first unauthorized attempt to use the information that had gone up on the site. The second time, it took 9 minutes before we saw the information begin to be used. So 9 minutes. So what's the lesson there? You got to act fast, right? Act fast. As soon as you discover you've been a victim, you want to act fast. Now, the good news, of course, is that in many instances, you'll be able to recover your money, depending on what you do, particularly if it's credit-related information. But don't wait. Act fast once you discover you've been a victim, because the scammers are acting fast. Second interesting piece of information is where they used the information they took. It's kind of odd. First of all, the biggest piece of information, the biggest purchase that we saw in that period was actually $2,600 at a clothing website, which is interesting because they take the information, they don't go to a store, they went to another website and try to buy clothing on the website. Total amount over 2 weeks from the information, $12,000 of purchases were made using the information that we saw. Multiple payment attempts, various efforts to try to get past an authorized payment. Some other attempts, they tried to sign up for online dating services. You need to read the Imposter brochure. They bought pizza, and they stayed in hotels. So there you go. That's what that's what identity thieves are going to do with your information once you get it. And that's actually only some of what they're going to do, of course, but that gives you a sense of what they're doing with it once they get it. They're out there having a good time and setting up dates and having pizza. So I'm going to wrap up here and see if you have any questions. But let's, because I see lunches here, let's talk about what your goals are here. I've given you some takeaways, and I have talked about some of the problems we're seeing, talked about some ways we're dealing with some of the issues we're seeing. But now here's the key part. What we need you to do, what we really need you to do is take this information and pass it on. Talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, talk to family members about what you've learned here today from Courtney, from Doug, from me, and take that information and disseminate it through your community, because that's really the only way that it's going to be effective in stopping this kind of scam, these kinds of scams we've talked about. We need that information out in the community. I saw there's still materials laying on my table, at least, and some materials on other tables. If you want to take some extra copies, please do. It's far less expensive for everyone if you take the information, hand it to your friends, and if I have to mail it or if they don't never get it at all. So please take it if you have friends. We have actually a website that has still more information on how to share and educate others. It's called ftc.gov, pass it on, one word. On that website, you can find education information and even presentations and handouts, so you can do your own presentations at your church, community group, or whatever, on topics like identity theft, imposter scams, charity fraud. You'll find all three. You'll find PowerPoints and other things on all three of those topics on the website. But the point is that is to use that information, use the information you get here, combine it with your own life experiences, combine it with that, the experience that Dr. Bowers had, which was a sad experience, but nevertheless she can use that experience now to educate others. Combine it with that information you have from those scammers who called you, with the grandparent scam, the heiress scam. Take that and use that combined with the information you hear today to educate your friends and neighbors and family members, because that's really what's going to help us get a handle on these scourges. And with that, Doug, I think I am ready to take a couple questions, if we can do that. I think I'll just go to my last site here. There's the FTC's website, by the way. Please feel free to check us out and get information on that site as well.
We have runners taking some questions from Mr. Harwood. I'll just stand here for moral support, because I know you're really scared of taking class.
Now I'm scared. With Doug next to me, I'm scared. Go ahead. Yeah, first question. Yes, sir.
Hi. If I answer the phone and someone says, hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
And if I say yes, can they use my voice as proof that I've signed up for something?
So there are lots of people who are investigating that now. There's actually information on a variety of websites, the FTC's website, the FCC's website, and others about that scam. It's possible they can. It's possible they can use that information. We just don't know for sure. We can't actually identify it yet. There are a couple other things they might be doing. They're simply trying to verify it's a valid phone number so they can sell the information to somebody else, because then this is somebody who answers their phone rather than let's go to voicemail. So that's a valuable piece of information right there if you think about it, if you're selling information to a scammer. In some cases, they pick up and they'll say, can you hear me? And the scammer hangs up and they'll call the scammer back. And what happens there is the scammer may not be in the United States. It may actually cost you money to call them. So there's a third aspect that is possibly an effort to try to get you to pay somebody money through making the phone call. So there's a variety of things that could be going on. Any of them sound bad. That's all I can say at that. But we'll, when we get more information about the voice authentication piece, we'll let you know. But it's certainly, whatever's going on, it's not good.
I went over here.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm on. Cool. This has all been very interesting, but one of the things I kind of expected to hear something about and haven't yet is, can't you solve a whole lot of these problems just by freezing your Social Security number with all the credit bureaus?
So you can freeze your information, and the Washington Attorney General's office has great information on that. But the freeze, I should explain what a freeze is. So freeze is, and I'm sure you know, but I'll just tell everybody else here in the room. A freeze is essentially where you say, do not grant further credit in my name, credit reporting, or do not allow others to grant credit in my name until I unfreeze my credit report. So what that says is that nobody can get access to your credit report to actually obtain credit in your name or to use it to obtain credit. And the trick, though, is it costs money, and that's the first trick. Unless you're over 65, which I bet there are one or two of you in this room who are, so you get it free, or if you're an identity victim, you can get it free. It's a Washington state law. And the other trick is you have to unfreeze again when you want to share the information if you do want to get credit. But a credit freeze is a great idea. I mentioned it briefly. I didn't go into a lot of detail, but we used to have doubts about it, but I actually think it's a wonderful solution, particularly if you're somebody who's not in the...
what about freezing your Social Security number? Can you do that?
So I'm not sure what that means. What does that mean? It means Social Security Administration is going to do whether they, I don't think you could just freeze the number. You need to freeze where it's going to be used by things like credit reporting agencies. They can't do it if you've frozen your credit reporting agency number. Yeah, that's exactly right. And yeah, so we'll go on. But the other thing I will say is that's not bulletproof, because there are other kinds of information they could steal from you, and there are other kinds of scams that don't use the credit information. But it's a great first step to deal with it. Okay, and by the way, credit freeze information is also on the FTC, the identitytheft.gov website. In the back.
I get calls, unsolicited calls from different charities.
And if you keep getting calls from the same entities, call the phone company and say, I'm tired of getting calls from these people, block the number. It won't always work because they'll change numbers, but it's at least the first step. Secondly, charities, yes, you can tell them, don't call me again, put my number on your do not call list. Now the problem is that charities don't have to subscribe to the general do not call list. They can ignore it, but they have to stop calling you if you say to them, stop calling me, put my number on your do not call list. So that's the second piece of information, no. And then invariably somebody's going to ask me, what about politicians? No, I can't stop them from calling you, I'm sorry. There's no way to stop that.
What about like Nomo Robo and call blockers?
Right, so that's part of it. There's some so the problem with call blockers traditionally has been scammers have gotten really good now at disguising the numbers they're calling from. This is an imposter scheme. They use what's called voice over internet protocol. It's hard to identify the number, so it's hard to block. But increasingly, the technology is solving the problem by creating long lists of bogus phone numbers, a little like a spam database program where they're actually using, they're blocking spam. And any of those numbers that come in, it's saying, don't let that number go through. And so what we're seeing now is greater use of things like Nomo Robo, which is a private service that some cell phone companies offer, or other efforts like that to actually block whole collections of numbers. So you don't actually have to call. They just know that if a call comes from any of these 1,000 different phone numbers, they should block it. It's more like having a spam filter on a phone. I think technology is moving that direction, not as fast as we'd like, but they're certainly moving in that direction. And particularly if you have a cell phone you're getting calls on, it's worth checking with your carrier if you're getting lots of calls, see if they can block more of those numbers. Okay, yes, over here, yeah.
The question I have is that why doesn't a program like Windows alert you to those pop-ups that say, where you were talking earlier about you have a virus to call this number? Is there any virus program that will block those?
Well, so I think the problem is that they enter your computer through a variety of different means. I'm not an expert. Certainly I'm not a computer tech expert, except I've had viruses on my computer. So I do know that part of the experience. I think they enter through a variety of different means. So there's not one single sort of portal they're coming through that you can block. And the scammers work on that. Windows, in my experience, does block. Windows does have a security feature. Courtney talked about that, the Windows Defender program, which will block some of those viruses. In addition, there is a program that spots some bogus websites. mean, some of the browsers have this. They'll spot bogus websites and say, wait a minute, this website address doesn't match what we expect to see. The certificate is invalid, so you shouldn't go to that site because of the certificate. Those are all features, but I appreciate that that's not a complete solution. And it sounds like you're frustrated, as the rest of us are, that there's not a better defense out there than that. Yeah.
Let's take a couple more questions,
Yeah.
then we'll have lunch.
Okay.
Wrap this up. Any other questions?
Over here?
Back
Whichever, yeah.
Okay.
Hello. I'm wondering whether this is a fraud issue. Your Charities for Cancer made me think of an incident that occurred about a month ago. I received a call from DirecTV. I do have DirecTV. They thanked me for being a longtime customer, and because I was going to get free Showtime and Cinemax. And she kept talking and talking, and this was only going to be an additional $8 a month, and talking and talking. She didn't even ask me if I concurred with that. And so she kept talking, and then, thank you very much. And she paused, and I said, you didn't even ask me if I agreed to that. And I said, no, I don't agree to that. And I hung up, and I was just furious, because if that would have been my mother, for example, she wouldn't have been given an opportunity to say yes or no. The phone would have been hung up. Is that a fraud issue?
It's troubling. Yeah, so a couple thoughts on that. First of all, I would say free and then $8 that's a tip-off right there, clearly. I'm guessing what they're doing is they're going to offer it to you for free for a limited period, and then they're going to start charging you the money and hope you don't notice the fact that you're now paying the $8 or whatever it is additional plus up on the cost. So it's a free, what we call free-to-pay conversion is what we call it in that world. Yeah, it can be a fraud if they don't adequately disclose that there's a conversion process where they're going to start charging you after the free period. And if you're seeing that and you didn't think you authorized the payment and you thought it was always going to be free, or they were supposed to not charge you at all, then you should complain. The AG's office or ftc.gov complaint, because that's free to pay. We do those cases.
One more question. Who's got the last question?
Mike over here. Okay. I'll be around, by the way, for a few minutes longer. Yeah. So,
have you heard of a new fraud issue that I heard about, of taking your documents to a copy center and copy machines are keeping track?
Yeah. Right. So Courtney talked about the memory that exists in printers. It also exists in copy machines. And I have not heard of anybody stealing information from, let's say, Kinko's copiers. But you know, you want to be careful, clearly. And I would be careful. I would think you might be better off going to some place like Kinko's than, I don't know, a random, is there such things as sort of scammy copiers places? I don't know. If there are, those might be the ones to be worried about. Or you may have hit on a new scam opportunity for somebody. But I'd be careful about what I copied and think about whether you really need the copies or not. You know, one of the ways that we see identity theft happen is people just have too much paper and they leave too much stuff around. And you know, instead of saving more and creating more, we really should be trying to shred more and save less, which would also solve the copy problem. So anyway, I'm going to stop there, but I will hang around for a bit, and I want to thank AARP for putting on this great event.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doug.
Thank you.